Welcome to Compass Points, the weekly podcast for CompassKnox.com. CompassKnox.com is your best source for news and politics in Knoxville and Knox County. Your hosts today are Scott Barker and Jesse Mayshark, the founders of CompassKnox.com. You can find their daily in-depth coverage and subscribe at CompassKnox.com. The Compass Point podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Almost an Agreement. Almost an Agreement is a layman's attempt to get a handle on the workings in government and politics that we deal with every day. Check them out at almostanagreement.com or subscribe for free on your favorite podcast provider. If you'd like to learn more about the topics discussed on today's podcast, go to CompassKnox.com and subscribe for in-depth coverage and much more. And now, here are your hosts, Scott and Jesse from CompassKnox.com.
Hello and welcome again to Compass Points, the weekly podcast where we talk about Knoxville news, government, politics, education, business, really whatever gets our attention. I'm Jesse Mayshark, co-founder and co-publisher of Compass, which you can find at CompassKnox.com, where we cover all of those things. Joined, as always, by Scott Barker, also co-publisher and co-founder of Compass. How are you doing today, Scott?
Doing just fine, Jesse. How about yourself?
Yeah, doing well. It's a little bit of a, looks like it's going to be a bit of a gray weekend here, so I hope everybody manages to have a good time regardless. We have some things to talk about this week. Not what I would call a super loaded week on the local news front, but certainly some things worth mentioning. We have new population estimates to talk about from the U.S. Census, which are kind of interesting. We had an update this week on the construction of the new stadium just outside the old city. We ran a sizable preview of the August 1st election. That's right. We do have another election between now and November, the one that everybody's talking about. So we'll talk about that a little bit. And Scott, I think to start off, we did have a couple of manifestations here locally this week of something that has really been kind of maybe the top news story in the country, really, which is protests over the war in Gaza. And we, of course, nationally, we've seen on college campuses, places like Columbia, UCLA, really all over the country, there have been large student protests. Some of those have turned chaotic and even violent. There have been, I don't know the total number, but many hundreds of people arrested around the country. And so we had a couple of examples of that same movement here. And of course, we are not here to talk about or debate the events in Gaza, the attacks by Hamas, the retaliatory invasion by Israel, and everything that goes along with that, because we're not really in any position to say anything about that, except that there are much better sources of information than us on all of that. But we can talk about the local impact of this. And so it took a couple of forms, and one of them was at the city council meeting this week, which is really a continuation of something we've seen over the last few months. So what happened there?
Yeah, this was the third meeting in a row that that pro-Palestinian residents had basically engaged in some civil disobedience, I guess, although they were, for the most part, obedient. Once again, on Tuesday night, they were on each agenda item, someone would speak for the full 5-minute allotment. Usually 2 people, sometimes 3 for each agenda item. The agenda was practically devoid of controversial topics, but so should have been about an hour-long meeting to be 3.5 hours. But the protesters would get up, and they've kind of refined their techniques a little bit. They basically take the summary of the agenda item, run it through an AI program, and which produces a speech of 5 minutes in length for them, and so they'll get up. The speeches are they're kind of stilted. The language is real wooden, and
as AI writing
tends to be. Sometimes there are errors in there. One of the agenda items was setting the tax rate for next year, and it didn't say, and this is something that they're required to do every year, didn't say whether the tax rate was going up or staying the same or going down. Just said this is what the tax rate's going to be. Well, the AI program assumed that it was a tax increase. It is in fact not. It is staying exactly the same as it was, so that made for kind of a weird thing. But they would give these speeches, and at the very end of the speech, they'd shout "ceasefire now," and their supporters in the audience would then shout out "ceasefire now." And the mayor said you're out of order, but of course they were finished. So
right, because to be clear, when people are signing up to speak to specific agenda items, they're required by council rules to address the item on the agenda. There is a separate public forum at the end of the meeting where they can talk about whatever they want to. But this, by signing up for each item, you're getting many more speaking slots. And in previous meetings where they had kind of ignored that rule, then they get gavelled down. And so, I know this is a little, and maybe the protesters themselves would be the best people to ask, but sort of functionally, what do you see as the point of that, where you're basically spending 5 minutes not talking about Gaza, talking about whatever is on the agenda, or at least sort of talking about what's on the agenda, and then just kind of saying ceasefire right at the end of it. What do you think is the point of taking the whole 5 minutes to do that, instead of just getting up and saying ceasefire now and, getting gavelled down? But
that would be that would definitely save a lot of time. I mean, I think that is part of it, is they're wanting to make life miserable for the mayor and council members
who declined to pass a resolution calling for a
ceasefire. Twice declined to pass a resolution calling for a ceasefire. And so I think they're just wanting to make the meetings miserable for them. And you're right, they could just go up and say ceasefire now. The mayor would start to gavel them down. They just turn around and walk back to the seat, and they wouldn't build up so much ill will because there's not a lot of goodwill from between them and the council members. Now, there were a couple of incidents that happened. There were 3 people wound up getting thrown out of the meeting. One.
Let's be specific about thrown out. What does that consist of?
Well, they were told to leave, did not leave immediately, and police escorted them out. They did not arrest them. They took them to the door of the city county building and said, go on your merry way. And there was one woman who, and this kind of goes back to the AI thing. She spoke to several issues, and so she had several speeches in her phone. And lost track of where she was, didn't know what agenda item it was, and asked the mayor to tell her what the agenda item was again. And Mayor Kincannon said, "Hey, it's up to you to keep up with that, not me." And so there was a little bad blood there. And when she couldn't figure out what she was going to speak on, the mayor said, "Well, sit down. You're out of order because you don't know what you're going to be speaking on." And one of the audience members in the audience stood up and was yelling, and several people were yelling. One was persistent, and the mayor told her to leave or she'd be escorted out. She ended up being escorted out. Later on, there was a woman who did stray off the topic and really go into the Israeli attack on Gaza, and the mayor tossed her out. And then there was at the end, during the public forum where you are the portion where you are allowed to speak on any topic you want, there was one person who was speaking on Gaza. He was angry. But it was still within the rules. But there's a time limit, 5-minute time limit. He got to the time limit, and the mayor gabbled. He kept going. She kept banging the gavel. He kept going, and people started yelling. And she told him he was going to be arrested if he didn't stop talking. And he started going toward the door. Another member in the audience who had spoken to several of the topics proceeded to flip the mayor a bird and said, "Hold this out of order, bitch." And the mayor did not take kindly to being called a bitch, and so she did indeed hold him out of order and had the police escort him out. So,
but again, there were no arrests.
No arrests. No. Right? They haven't been doing that when they've just been taking them out. Now, there was a pretty decent police presence there, because there have been rumors on social media that there was going to be a much more dramatic.
Right. There was a poster that circulated that said, I believe it said, "Shut it down."
Yeah.
Which is a sort of vague phrase, could mean lots of different things, but it doesn't sound like anything was exactly shut down. Just prolonged.
No. Yeah, it was prolonged. It definitely wasn't shut down. But I think that prompted the police to show. There were probably about 15 officers there, 3 different locations, roughly 5 in each group. 5 were inside the main assembly room. Then the other 10 were, 5 were in the lobby. 5 were kind of in a little alcove, just sitting around, and in case they were needed. And they rotated through. But it was other than being loud, it was not disruptive or not violent. So certainly. Sure. So anyway, also in the middle of that, Councilwoman Amelia Parker, who had been the one to propose those amendments or the resolutions that were not adopted and not even voted on by her colleagues, got into an argument with the mayor. Kind of rare for a council member to directly argue in public with the mayor, but she did. She wanted the mayor to change her mind on the woman that forgot where her place was in the agenda, and wanted to let her speak anyway. And mayor was kind of like, well, make a resolution, vote on it if you want to overturn my decision. So Parker did, and no other council member seconded the motion, so it died, and they went on with the meeting. But it was pretty contentious. Oh, and by the way, they did pass the budget on first reading.
Right. In the midst of all that.
That was the whole reason for, not the whole reason for the meeting, but it was the most important item on the agenda was the budget. It's a $461.6 million budget, no property tax increase, and so it wasn't going to be too controversial, especially on first reading when City Council is required to pass it.
Basically, a pro forma adoption on first reading, then they will have their budget hearings and then adopt it fully on second reading later in the month. So then we did also have, during this past week, some protests on the University of Tennessee Knoxville campus, which were sort of uneventful for a couple of days, but then turned a little bit confrontational Thursday night, right?
Yeah, there was a vigil on Wednesday, pretty much day-long thing, and at the in front of the law school there on Cumberland Avenue, and then on Thursday they were back. There were apparently around 150 or so at least at one point there, but it was all very, very peaceful. They were handing out pamphlets, things like that. The university put out a couple of signs out there talking about how they value free speech, and and the campus is a place for civil debate and all this, and but then toward the end, and they weren't going to let them stay indefinitely. They weren't going to let them sleep there, have an encampment there. According to Chancellor Don D. Plowman, it's a violation of university policy. There's a state law against camping overnight on public property, which is kind of initially aimed at protesters in Nashville, but hey, it also includes people who are homeless and in this situation. So, but they gave them a deadline to leave, and they'd been talking with them all day. This is not a big surprise move on the part of the university, and but they'd been speaking with the protesters all day, most of whom are students, some are not. And most left before the deadline. But they told them, if you stay beyond, I believe it was 9:30. If you stay beyond that point, you're going to be arrested. And the ones who stayed did get arrested, knowing full well that they were going to be getting arrested. It's the one thing, we were talking about this before we came on the air. Civil disobedience. That's kind of part of the deal. Is you violate a law in order to bring attention to your cause, knowing that you're going to be arrested, and that's exactly what happened here. They were, and
it was only 9 people.
Only nine people. 7 of them were students. 2 of them are not affiliated with the university in any way. They were cited. Which is, the lowest form of a misdemeanor there possibly is. The students could face disciplinary action from the university. It was, is nowhere close. I mean, orders of magnitude smaller than what went on at UCLA and what went on at Columbia and what went on at some of the other colleges and universities around the country. So, all in all, as far as these things go, it was fairly peaceful and direct from that. But one of the things that Chancellor Plowman said was, we're not going to let any group of people just take over part of our campus for an indefinite period of time. They can speak, they can gather at appropriate times, but basically, she didn't say it this way, but basically there's a time and place for everything. After 9:30 at night, apparently that's not the time or place.
Well, and that is, obviously there are lots of First Amendment issues bound up with all of these kinds of issues where you have people, the right to protest in public is absolutely essential and foundational to the First Amendment, to really American history and the Constitution. And it is broadly protected, but as we know, there can be time and place restrictions. That's something that reasonable time and place restrictions, and what constitutes reasonable can always be argued, but that is something that's allowed by court precedent and laws, and so obviously that's what UT is saying, that these were the restrictions we put in; they apply to everybody. It's different. The time and place restrictions are different than content restrictions, right? Yeah, and UT was very careful to say that this isn't based on anything you're saying. It's just based on your presence at this particular place at this time.
Right. Yeah. It was their, I mean, they in their official communications, about 3/4 of them is, basically, we believe in free speech. We believe in
all the stuff that their lawyers make them put in there in case they get sued. Basically.
But also, I mean, one of the big things that's been going on at UT for the last couple of years is the establishment of the Baker School and the Institute of American Physics or Civics, which is all about reasoned debate. Disagreeing without being disagreeable, those kinds of things. And so it's also kind of in keeping with kind of the tenor of Plowman's time at the university. So,
sure. Well, it's obviously an interesting time to be living through. And
we must say this: we're taping this on Friday afternoon.
Right. Something could always happen between now and
the time you hear this, folks out there. Something else could have happened.
Right.
So this is just kind of the status as of Friday afternoon. And in fact, I went by the law school on my way here. Went by there. There was no gathering there anyway at all today. So.
And of course, UT is right at the end of their semester now, and it's probably university administrators here and around the country are kind of hoping they can get through graduation, get through finals, get through graduation, and then let things maybe cool off over the summer. Although obviously, a lot of that will depend on things that happen other places.
That's true. And it was also raining today, so that was probably a contributing factor. Everything will, everything's going to hinge on if there is a resolution and what that resolution might be in Gaza. And students at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville City Council, Knoxville residents in general had, it's out of their hands. It's in the hands of the Israelis and Hamas.
Right. And of course, people have every right to speak
They
up.
can still speak out, but the whether this continues and the tension level that it reaches in various places will depend on that. So.
Absolutely. All right. Well, turning our focus back more locally, as we usually do, we also this week ran a preview of the August 1st election, which is coming up pretty quickly. Early voting actually starts on July 12th, so we're only about 2 months out from that. And this ballot is interesting because it is both the Knox County general election, and so, of course, we covered the county primaries in March, so now we have the general election for a whole bunch of county seats, and it is also the primary for state and federal offices, and so we have some interesting races in all of those categories. Of course, as far as the county goes, there are 7 county commission seats up for election, which there's only 11 seats on county commission. So, more than 2/3 of the, or I guess right around 2/3 of the seats on county commission are up. And there's only 2 incumbents running out of those 7 seats. So at a minimum, that means we're going to have 5 new county commissioners in September. That's a big turnover on an 11-member body. And interestingly, and this has not always been the case in the past, every single one of those races is contested. So there is at least a Democrat and a Republican running for all 7 of those seats. And in a couple of those races, there's also an independent third-party kind of candidate on the ballot. And, we wrote about these races a lot in the primary. And I think, Scott, the couple of races people are probably watching the most closely are the 4th and 9th district county commission seats. The 4th district, because it is clearly the most politically divided or diverse of the county's districts. It's the only district in the county that is currently represented by both a Democrat on school board, you have Catherine Bike, and a Republican on county commission, Kyle Ward. And Ward is not running for re-election, and so we have Garrett Holt, who won the Republican primary, is the Republican candidate there, and Shane Jackson is the Democrat. And both of them, I think, are viewed as pretty strong candidates. They've both raised a fair amount of money. Jackson, actually, as of the last report at the end of March, actually had more money on hand than Holt did. And, that district's an interesting one. It stretches, it's basically West Knoxville. And so it stretches from Sequoia Hills out along North Shore through Rocky Hill and a little bit west of Rocky Hill, out along Kingston Pike through Bearden to West Hills. And it has become this is a district that I think used to be very establishment Republican, and in the last couple of decades it has become increasingly mixed, and especially those neighborhoods sort of closer into the city, Sequoia Hills very much, have become pretty strong Democratic strongholds. And so I think one reason we're seeing so much focus on this seat is that there are only 2 Democrats right now on county commission out of 11 commissioners. And this is the seat that Democrats have long thought, and I think especially this year, think is their most likely one that they could flip.
Yeah, the numbers from the last couple of elections certainly lend some support to that theory. Doesn't mean that they will flip it. Doesn't mean that it certainly wouldn't be easy, but it was going to be a very it could be close.
Oh yeah, yeah. I think it'll be close, and a lot of it'll depend on who all comes out in that August election. One thing we saw in March was very heavy Republican turnout because there were many more reasons for Republicans to come out and vote in the March primaries. Whereas in August, first of all, you have all of these contested races that would bring out both Democrats and Republicans, you would think. But if you look at what toward the top of the ballot is going to bring people out, because that tends to be, in March it was the presidential primary, people coming out to vote either for Donald Trump or against Donald Trump in the Republican primary. In August, if you look at what's going to motivate people, and this is one of the other races that we wrote about in our preview, there's nothing to do with the presidential contest, obviously, on the August ballot. The governor is not on the ballot this year, but we do have a Senate race, and we have a Democratic primary in the Senate race, and we have a Democratic primary that features Knoxville's own Gloria Johnson, who is running for the Democratic nomination so that she can challenge Marsha Blackburn in November. And so will that be a factor in terms, will Democrats be more motivated to come out and vote in August, to show support for hometown representative in that race? We don't know, but if you're kind of looking for what's going to motivate people to vote beyond just their county commission race or their school board race or whatever, I think that's one possible factor there. The 9th County Commission district, the other one that I think is interesting to watch because, again, it's the South Knoxville, South Knox County district, traditionally Republican. It's been represented by Republicans on county commission as long as I know of.
As long as I can remember, yep.
But in their school board race there 2 years ago, incumbent Christy Christie won re-election as a Republican, but not overwhelmingly. And the precincts, especially within the city in South Knoxville, have also trended more Democratic in recent years. And that race has some particularly interesting characteristics, which we will talk about more at a future point when because we're going to write about each of these races individually. So we'll talk about that more then. But I do think that that's another race that I know the county Democrats are paying a lot of attention to it. I'm sure the county Republicans would very much prefer to keep it in Republican hands. And it'll be, that's another one could very much turn on just turnout, who gets more of their people out. So we wrote about those and all of the other competitive races on that August ballot this past week. You can find that on our website. If you are not a subscriber, but you still want to read that story, if you wait a bit, sometime before early voting starts, we will move all of our election coverage outside the paywall, as we always do, to provide that public service.
But if you just can't wait, you can go ahead and subscribe.
Yes.
At CompassStocks.com.
Absolutely. We would welcome your patronage, and we appreciate all of our subscribers. Thank you so much. Okay, Scott, you decided that this was a good week to go and kind of get caught up on the stadium construction downtown. Where are we at with that? I've been by there several times, and you can really see it taking shape. You can see the infield. You can see the stands. Yeah,
it's starting to look like a stadium. It's kind of interesting. They usually give an update on construction progress at Sports Authority meetings, and the Sports Authority didn't meet last month, so I said, well, I'll go ahead and do one, because it's a year from now they'll be playing baseball. the Knoxville Smokies will be playing baseball there. So I talked to Barry Brook, who's he's kind of the construction advisor for the Sports Authority. He's the one that keeps tabs of on progress, and is in contact with the contractors and that sort of thing. Anyway, he said that they are about roughly ballpark, so to speak, 60% complete, and they're on target to finish up work at the end of March next year. So
just in time.
Yeah. They've got an exact delivery date. I rarely refer to that because anything can happen, but it's March 20th is the date they say it's going to be ready. The minor league baseball season starts in April, so we will continue watching this grow out of the ground. But right now, the main grandstand behind behind home plate, which will have the press box and the suites and the all that's the concrete's been poured for it. You can go, you can look. They're to the point. They're almost to the point of starting to roof that, and see that the light poles are up. The lights are up around there. So that's so it is really looking like a baseball stadium. They've gone out the left field line, the bleachers and the seating that will be along the left field or the third base line. Out to left field, they're pretty much done. They're pretty much in. They're working on the concourse, which will go completely around the stadium. They're still out. They're out in left field doing that. They've got the foundation in place for their fancy scoreboard. That's $1.6 million scoreboard or whatever it is. It's going to go in. They've just started putting the foundations in for the seating along the first base line. So they're trying to. One of the things is they need to get all of this work that basically requires access from what will in the future be the ball field. They need to get all of it done before the end of the summer, because they've got to install the field. They need to do that before winter hits, and it takes a lot of work. They've got to, they've got a irrigation system, drainage system. The drainage system is really important because first of all, they've got to meet baseball standards, professional baseball standards. But part of that is having a system in place where if it rains, within just a very short amount of time, you can go out and play on the field. So that's a really important thing. They get the right mix of sand and soils and all that kind of stuff. And then before they even think about putting out the sod, but they got to have everything in place before winter hits. Mm-hmm. Because you can't do that in March and have it take hold. So, but they've got a lot of they Brooke thought that they would be able to meet that, especially if they can continue having good weather to work in. And then once they get all that in, they can start doing the inside stuff, the finishing work, the tile in the bathrooms and the flooring in the suites and those kinds of things. So, but it's moving along. They're going to be, like I said, the Brooks said that they are on schedule, and if the weather cooperates, that they should be that this time next year they should be playing baseball under those lights.
Well, I'll be there.
As much as I've had to cover the thing, and even though we don't do sports, I certainly plan to cover opening night for sure.
Yeah. I mean, I'm a baseball fan. At least I grew up as a baseball fan, and I still have a lot of affection for the game. And I will say that I am one of these, sorry, Randy Boyd and the Smokies, but I am one of these Knoxville fans who has not made it out to Mascot a whole lot during the time they've been there. It's just a little bit more of a drive than I want to make most times going out the interstate there. So I am pretty sure that my attendance at Smokies games will increase dramatically because of the convenience of it. And, I'm really looking forward to really seeing the interface with the old city and the rest of downtown, and, how that flow is going to work, how the parking is going to work. Lots of questions about that. I'm sure we'll have plenty of time to talk about that in the future as it all comes together. But that's, I'm looking forward to going there to see some games, but I'm also just curious to really see, we can see the physical size and bulk of it, but of course we can't yet really understand how everything is going to flow in and out and around it down there.
Yeah, how it is integrated into the rest of the city in general, the old city in particular, and then the other things that are going to go in addition to that. I mean, one of the things that Boyd said in a comment he gave us for his story was, there are going to be a series of announcements about retailers and restaurants and all that are going to come in. Some of them will be in the stadium development, and some of them will be exterior to the stadium development. And at least that's always been the plan. And so seeing the types of businesses that are attracted to those locations will be very interesting to be also to see if there's more development to come as a result of the stadium. And that's one of the of course a lot of ink has been spilled on analyzing the economic impacts of stadiums like this. Some of them, quite frankly, underperform. This one has some private development already associated with it, but obviously, the city would like to see this, and the county, because it's owned by both the city and the county through the joint sports authority. They want to see that spur development, especially toward the east, into East Knoxville, which is an area that it was, as anyone who's been in Knoxville longer than a day or two understands, has not seen the investment that other parts of the town have.
Right. Well, and of course, there's a bit of a chicken and egg thing with this, because it is going into an area that's already been building up and developing, and development has been moving sort of outside beyond the old city, both to the north and east for some years now. And so, the stadium probably both benefits from that, and then the hope is that could contribute to continuing that movement, basically.
Yep, absolutely.
All right. Also, some interesting news came from the Tennessee Data Center, which is housed there in the, the Boyd Center for Business and Economic Research in the Haslam School at the University of Tennessee. these things with a long formal name. Anyway, one of the things that the Tennessee Data Center does on a regular basis is crunch census data, which is a very helpful thing for them to do, because census data, if you've ever tried to work with the raw files, can be a little bit hard to figure out what it all means. You have to know what all the different reference numbers and categories are. Their estimate is that as of 2023, and this is based on the census's American Community Survey estimates, so these are sampling estimates. They're not, every 10 years, of course, we have the actual census where they have they try to count every single person. This is based on sampling. But their estimate is that Knox County has crossed a threshold, that we now have more than 500,000 people living in Knox County. Now, this was a very predictable outcome. The 2020 census put us right in the vicinity of 480,000, but we know we've had several good years of growth since then, and that includes 2023, when for the second year in a row, Knox County, and this isn't a percent increase, this is like raw numbers, Knox County had the second most people move to it of any county in Tennessee for the second year in a row. We had about 5,000 people, new residents in 2023. The number one county for the second year in a row, actually for several years in a row now, is Rutherford County, home to Murfreesboro, which is one of the fastest growing counties in the state. But we were second. So that means, yes, you're hearing that right, more people, this again, not a percentage, more actual people moved to Knox County, both last year and the year before, then moved to Davidson County, where Nashville is. Then moved to Hamilton County. Now, Hamilton County, home to Chattanooga, was close. They were third or fourth on the list, and I think they were right after Knox County, and just had a few hundred fewer new people. So Hamilton County, Chattanooga, they are continuing to see growth too. And I don't know that it means a whole lot that we go from 495,000 to, the estimate is exactly at 500,669 people. So somewhere in the last 700 people who moved to Knox County or were born here, one or the other, one of you was our 500,000th resident. So congratulations. I don't know if you get anything for that.
I don't think so.
But I think that like I said, we've been able to see this coming, this trajectory for quite a while now. To me, it still feels like a major milestone. 500,000, a metro county of 500,000 people is not a sleepy little East Tennessee county.
No, it's not. It does makes you feel kind of grown up. But it is. It's a substantial number, and it's. I don't, it's probably more of a psychological thing than anything else, but, it does. Knoxville has always, quote unquote, chased Nashville and Memphis, and still we're nowhere close to either one of those. But still, it seems like at 500,000 we're in the same ballpark. We're in the same conversation. So.
Yeah, and I think that. We also often get wrapped up in conversations with Chattanooga because city limits Chattanooga is close to the size of city limits Knoxville. Now, one thing that will be interesting to see in terms of Knoxville, the next data report that we get probably in the near future will be the city limits population estimate. And at last year's point, that was up over 190,000. It is possible that Knoxville itself will cross a threshold either, this year or next year, but sometime soon, probably cross into that 200,000 range. And so that will probably also feel like a little bit, a city of 200,000 people sounds like more than a city of 180,000, which is what it was kind of stuck at for about 50 years.
Really?
But if you broaden the scope beyond city limits, there's really no comparison between Knox County and Hamilton County. Hamilton County has 300 and 70-ish thousand people. It's much, much smaller, actually, than Knox County is. So even though the cities are close to each other, as a metro area, we are the third largest metro area in the state. Just mention, we mentioned Davidson County, which growth there has actually been sort of, of course, they had a massive boom in the first 15 years or so of this century. Their growth has really kind of slowed down. Because it got very expensive, it got very crowded, traffic got very bad. I think all of those things put a dent in it. They are building a whole bunch of new housing, and so maybe that'll make their housing a little more appealing to people. I actually heard this week from somebody who told me that they have a friend who moved to Knoxville from Nashville and moved back to Nashville because it was cheaper.
Oh,
you could get a better rent in Nashville, so maybe Nashville will benefit from that. But Shelby County, Memphis, which is on the one hand by far the largest county in the state, also is seeing by far the largest population declines in the state. And of course, Memphis has a lot of poverty, one of the higher crime rates, and it has the highest crime rate in the state. It's one of the higher crime rates in the country. All of those things are combining to work against it, and they've actually lost, according to this most recent estimate, they have 19,000 fewer people than in the 2020 census. So that's they still have 910,000 people. So it's a huge county. There's a lot of people there, but those numbers are dropping, and I'm sure people in Memphis are working on how they can reverse that. Not our problem here. Here, as we know from all the conversation we've had about our growth plan and everything else, the challenge we have is how do we accommodate this ongoing growth, and how do we do it in a way that can provide housing that people can actually afford. So, growth. A lot of people will tell you that growth is good. You get more people, you get more economic activity. But as we know very well, and as Davidson County certainly could attest, growth comes with complications, and so I think we can anticipate seeing more of those complications in the coming years.
I think you're right.
All right. Well, that kind of wraps us up for looking back at this past week. Let's look ahead to the coming week. A couple of interesting things. The school board will have its monthly meetings, their work session Monday and their voting meeting Thursday. And both of those will be at 5 p.m. in the Summer Place boardroom. I think there's a couple of interesting topics up for discussion at the Monday work session, including some discussion of this, the third grade, which now fourth grade reading retention issue that we've talked about before, the state law that could potentially hold back a bunch of people who are currently in fourth grade going into fifth grade next year. And so they'll have an update on that. And the biggest thing that people will be paying attention to is two board members are bringing resolutions, somewhat different wording, but the intent of both of them is to say that Knox County is not going to avail itself of this new state law that passed that would allow them to let teachers and other school employees go armed at school if they meet certain requirements. And so both Christy, who is part of the Republican majority on the school board, and Catherine Bike, who's a Democrat, they're both bringing resolutions. Christie's is a little softer, I would say, in the sense that it doesn't say anything about the state law itself. It just affirms that basically the status quo is what Knox County wants to keep, that the armed personnel in our schools will be our school security officers and local law enforcement officers. Bikes is worded a little more in opposition to the state law itself, and says more explicitly than Christie's does that Knox County will not arm teachers or employees. My guess is that Bike's resolution, because it really does take issue with the law and kind of declares an opposition to the law, that may have some difficulty winning support from Republican members of the board, since that law, of course, was passed by the Republican supermajority in the legislature. But they will talk about that at Monday's work session, then they'll vote on it at Thursday's meeting, vote on one or both of those resolutions. We will see. And then also on Thursday, Scott, we have the Knoxville Knox County Planning Commission, right?
That's right. You were talking about accommodating all of that growth. This is, planning commissions where people get subdivisions approved and rezoning's done, and there are going to be a bunch of them on Thursday. In fact, one of the developers who works exclusively in the county has 6 separate rezoning requests for subdivisions. That's Scott Davis on the agenda. So it's going to be pretty busy up there. And then there's also going to be the one of the things the Planning Commission must do is it must review and approve the city's capital improvement plan. And so that's going to be on the agenda as well. These are the big ticket construction things that the city will undertake in the coming year. So, Planning Commission has to approve it before it goes to City Council, and the time is Thursday.
And one other thing I forgot to mention, but that is also happening next week on Monday. County Mayor Glenn Jacobs, we've been talking about in the past weeks. We've talked about the school school board's proposed budget. We talked about Mayor Kincannon's proposed budget last week. This coming Monday, County Mayor Glenn Jacobs will make his budget proposal, and he's going to present that at 10:30 Monday, and in the main assembly room of the City County building. And I don't think we're anticipating seeing any real big shocks there. The school system makes up the majority of the county budget, makes up close to 2/3 of it, and we have seen the contours of that budget. The talk has been about having probably a pretty tight, maybe even close to flat county budget. So probably not anticipating a lot of big news spending items there, but of course, we will be there to cover that. We will write about it in Compass next week. You can read that if you are a subscriber. And we will be back here next Friday or next Sunday. It gets confusing taping on one day and releasing it on another day. Anyway, we'll be back next week to talk about anything that happens next week. And until then, hope you have a good one.
Welcome to Compass Points, the weekly podcast for CompassKnox.com. CompassKnox.com is your best source for news and politics in Knoxville and Knox County. Your hosts today are Scott Barker and Jesse Mayshark, the founders of CompassKnox.com. You can find their daily in-depth coverage and subscribe at CompassKnox.com. The Compass Point podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Almost in Agreement. Almost in Agreement is a layman's attempt to get a handle on the workings in government and politics that we deal with every day. Check them out at almostinagreement.com or subscribe for free on your favorite podcast provider. If you'd like to learn more about the topics discussed on today's podcast, go to CompassKnox.com and subscribe for in-depth coverage and much more. And many thanks to William Wright for composing our theme song. Compass Points is a partnership of Barking Shark Media and Barbarian Productions, and recorded by Lord Seth A. Barber at Barbarian Studios, Knoxville, Tennessee.